Hey everyone, this is Dion with Racers360. Today we're going to be covering the top 3 mistakes that our Racers360 coaches see drivers making on Buttonwillow. So let's go ahead and start digging right into that. So the first mistake that we often see drivers make is on approach into turn 2. So a great visual is going to be this flag stand here on our right-hand side. What we typically see is drivers starting to turn in too early. So we chose this onboard because it's going to be a great example of what we actually want to see. But a lot of drivers start to turn in right about now. And what ends up happening is when you turn in too early, it's harder for you to keep it to the left here. What ends up happening, right, is you apex the start of this curve, which then means you have to really hold it left and turn it left in the middle of this brake zone, and it's harder to brake with straight hands. So what happens when we turn in a little bit later, you can see here our driver at the end of this flag stand. Notice how this is where they're starting to turn in. Notice how that gives them a straighter approach into this brake zone, so they can brake with straighter hands. They can ask for more out of the car. As we turn more in the middle of the brake zone, we have to brake less because we're asking for the tires to turn and stop. Tires aren't good at doing both of those. So by turning later and it's a little bit more aggressively earlier, we're able to brake with straighter hands, apply more brake pressure, be more effective with rolling speed past this first apex. Now, as we go through this brake zone, our driver holds it a little bit more left than I'd like to see. This depends a little bit on how much horsepower you have. They're in a very high horsepower car. So in those type of cars, I'm going to hold it a little bit more left to really open up the radius, really able to unwind the steering wheel because it's hard to put the power down. In lower horsepower cars, your spec Miatas, things like that, I want to be about middle of the road, right? So as we start to come in here, my car position would be a little bit more here. I definitely don't want to be any more to the inside. If you're out over here, you're too far to the right. And in a lower horsepower car, you don't want to end up out over here as well. You sort of kind of have your hands straight into the corner. All righty. So moving forward here, you can see our driver holds a little bit left, sets up for turn 2. Nice. Applying the throttle. Let the car be free out of here. So the next thing happens to be here in the cotton corner is really this whole turn 3 section. So what we often see drivers doing here is we know that we typically want to hold it to the right after this first right-hander to set up for the next left-hander. So the mistake that we often see here is drivers getting to throttle too early. Now, this is a common mistake anywhere, but it's extra important here to be patient with your throttle because when we get to throttle, we're taking weight off the front end, and that's going to induce a little understeer into the car. That's going to push the car further to the left, making it harder to hold it to the right. So really what we want to be able to do here is how can I get as much rotation as possible to be able to hold it as much to the inside as possible with as much speed as possible, right? The more speed I can roll through here while still holding it to the right, the better I'm going to be. So what we really want to do is be able to trail brake to or maybe even slightly past the apex point to keep more weight on the front nose to be able to hold it more to the right. So here we're coming in, we're coming off the brakes, trail braking, and then right about here as we're ready to get our hands straight, boom, aggressive square to throttle, full throttle, then off. Now, the next mistake in here is we often see drivers actually sacrificing too much speed in this left-hander. Now, the first time I went to the racetrack, and if I look at the track map, I would think I want the car placed perfectly to the outside here to really maximize my speed through here. For whatever reason, it doesn't actually help you that much. So this is sort of like what we talked about turn 2, where we don't want to be all the way to the inside. We don't want to be all the way to the outside. I definitely don't want to use this, like, I don't want to be out over here, and I don't want to be all the way to the outside as well. Right about mid-road, it seems to be the right compromise of rolling enough speed to the left-hander without over-sacrificing, but not, so much that you really hurt yourself through this final right-hand corner here. So notice here our driver, right about mid-road as they turn in, perfect, back to throttle, using every inch of the road, exactly what I want to see. So the last mistake that we'll talk about here is in Riverside. So what we typically see is drivers, the car is more than likely going to have understeer through Riverside. A little banking, we're on throttle. A lot of that signifies, hey, weight off the front nose, we're going to understeer. What we often see is drivers anticipating that understeer, so they lift early, and then they come back to some maintenance throttle through the middle of the corner, and they drive through Riverside all the way through on maintenance throttle. But that is artificially lowering the ceiling of grip the car has. So really what we want to be able to do is don't anticipate the understeer, drive it hard in, and then as the car starts to understeer, that's where we want to slow release off the throttle, because now we're going to arrive with more speed. We're going to manage the weight transfer better by lifting. It's going to shift weight to the front nose, which is going to help that understeer. It's going to get you better pointed so that as you come back to this curve, you're aggressively getting back to throttle and hopefully back to flat somewhere in here, using enough road, but then hustling it back pretty close to the edge of the racetrack. So later turning point into turn 2, end of that flag stand on your right-hand side. Focusing on a really long trail break on the entry into turn 3, and then driving it hard into Riverside and not driving through the middle of the corner on throttle, but trying to carry full throttle deeper in, smooth lift, wait for the car to rotate for that second apex. And as the car gets pointed towards that second apex curve, that's where I'm reapplying the throttle. Those are the 3 most common mistakes here at Buttonwillow. This is Racers360. My name's Dion. We'd love to work with you here. You can upload your onboard footage just like this, and we'll walk through turn by turn what you can be doing from a technique perspective, a car placement perspective, maybe even some racecraft if you're racing wheel to wheel out there. We'd love to work with you. Visit Racers360.com to learn more. If you have any questions, just email us team@Racers360.com. We'll see you at a racetrack soon.